Добрий день, я вітаю.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joined us. Ukraine Media Center Ukrainian Forum continues its operation. It's the year 9 of the war, and it's the day of 243 of our fight for freedom. And I want to thank everybody throughout the world who tells the world about our fight for freedom. And now we will talk about this situation around the export of Ukrainian grain, and we are having Andrii Klymenko with us. He's the head of monitoring group of the Institute for Black Sea Strategic Studies. Mr. Andrii, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Mr. Andrii, the situation with the export of Ukrainian grain is getting more and more tense. we had the speaker of Odessa military administration, and he told us that the grain corridor is still operating. The vessels are leaving the port of Odessa. So can you tell us about the situation with this? Well, my colleague Serhiy Brachuk was right. If we analyze the number of the vessels leaving the ports in Odessa region, it's about 6-7 vessels per day, sometimes more, sometimes less. The problem has arisen about 1 month, a little bit more than a month ago, and it arose in the Marble Sea, where the inspection of the Joint Inspection and Coordination Center is taking place, and they inspect all the vessels, both entering and leaving Ukrainian ports. And in that area, a huge jam appeared. You can see the background behind me is the concentration of the vessels in the Marble Sea. Most of them are the vessels with the Ukrainian grain. I can comment the situation in better detail with my presentation. Our technical team is launching the presentation. You can see it on your screen. Well, the first slide is the overall situation in the Marble Sea. We monitor the vessels within the last 10 years. We started with the ship liners, and then we switched to the military vessels. I'm telling you this so that our colleagues understand that we know the situation in detail. The situation is non-standard, and the number of the vessels is non-standard. In the area to the south and to the west from Istanbul, I haven't seen a situation like this within the last 10 or even maybe 12 years. So we started investigating. If we check the second slide, another area with the abnormal concentration of the vessels is in the northern part of the Marble Sea. They are aligned in a very dense manner, and there was an incident when a vessel en route to Odessa port collided with another ship just because of the abnormal density of the ships in the area. So if we look at the slide, the ships in the gray circles are all the vessels with the grain. So there are three concentration areas. One is just to the south of Istanbul, another one, the area number 2, a little bit to the west from Istanbul, and the third concentration area is in the south of the sea. It accounts for about 30 to 40 vessels, so there are 3 main areas of concentration. And if we look at the next slide, so we see these areas of the concentration where most of the delays take place because of the slow inspections. And I want to ask you to switch to the next slide. This slide depicts the standard track of one single vessel, and judging by it, we can see what's going on. So the vessel enters the Marble Sea, and they're being told that there is no place for stop in either area 1 or 2. So it travels within a number of days. I want to emphasize it, it's several days. And they keep floating, just awaiting for their place in a queue, for their place in lines, and only then, upon a few days, it arrives to area number 1, where they have a small ship coming to them with the inspection team, which comprises both members from Ukraine, international community, and Russia. And let's switch to the next slide, where we have the dynamic of time of the waiting time for the inspection of the Joint Coordination Center in the Marble Sea from 1st to 30 September 2022. We took the example of the Chornomorsk port, and we've taken one full month, September. So on the diagram, these numbers on the diagram is the number of hours to be waited for the number of hours the vessel should be waiting from the moment the inspection arrives until the moment it's being released for further movement. So we can see that on the until September 18th, the number of hours was like up to 2.5 days, like 50, 60 hours, which was more or less normal for a procedure like this. But starting from September 18, I cannot tell you why, because we didn't investigate this issue. It may have depended on some statement by Putin or Lavrov about the grain corridor. So we see that the number of hours started averaging around 200 hours, but in some cases it's more than 400 hours, and in one case it's 528 hours. And we can see that the tendency, this dotted red line shows us the tendency of significant growth of the waiting time. So the next slide is in figures. 69 vessels left Chornomorsk port within the period from 1st to 30th of September 2022. With the total load of more than 1.5 million tons. That's from one single port, I remind you. And average waiting time for inspection was 189 hours, meaning almost 8 days. So, but we can compare the first half of September, when the waiting time was around 50 hours, and in the end of the month, I want to emphasize it again, it's for the ships which left in September was 20 days, 17 days in some cases. Now in this month it's even more, which clearly evidences that something is wrong. So what we're having now is the vessels losing their time. Every single day of waiting costs thousands of dollars for the vessel. So the contract terms are being infringed. They don't arrive on time as per the contract. People do not get Ukrainian food at their destinations, the people who are in need of this food. And ultimately, there is a breakdown of the whole logistic chain. So inequality of port load on ports, inequality of waiting times leads to us losing time and losing the export volumes, the volumes of grain to be potentially exported. So for the time being, there are more than 100 vessels waiting in the Marble Sea. And in the Black Sea, there are 30-40 more vessels waiting for entering the port. So I can tell you that the average dead weight of a vessel is 23-24 tons. If we multiply 130 by 22, we will get around 1.5 million of load of dead weight in these vessels, which cannot get to their destinations, half of which are European countries and another half is countries of Asia and Africa. Mr. Andrii, can you please tell us if we're having 130 vessels there for this moment, and if you were understanding that in September the average waiting time was growing, so what's the waiting time we're talking about now? That do we understand it correct that it's more than 20 days waiting time? Yes, absolutely correct. Now I'm thinking that we will see the average in the end of October, but I'm almost sure that the average waiting time will be more than 15 days, but in some individual cases, some vessels are waiting for the inspection of the Joint Contact Center for more than 1 month. Mr. Andrii, let's talk about the causes. What are the reasons for waiting? We understand that they are all waiting for the inspection, but what's the problem with the work, with the operation of this inspection? Well, we can only suppose, because we don't have exact information on that. However, the procedure itself creates a lot of factors which can be applied on the normal procedure. For example, like one of the representatives of one of the countries got ill, and the inspector's team is incomplete. And if a representative of one of the countries wants to, say, extend the time, they can inspect one vessel within half an hour, or they can inspect another vessel within 6 to 8 hours. And now we know that with the advent of the fall, the daylight time is shorter, and in the dark time, in the night, it's not so safe to go through the Marble Sea and to go to the vessel, embark and disembark the vessel. So if the participant, if the member of the inspection team wants to extend the waiting time, they just can wait for the sunset, or otherwise they can get ill, or they can say that, for example, there is a 3-degree storm and they are seasick. Well, if you want, you can find a lot of reasons, a lot of causes to extend the process. I am surprised in this regard that the Turkish maritime authorities, the Turkish are real good sailors with their centuries-long traditions. I'm surprised by their silence. I think it would be quite correct to inquire the Turkish sailors providing the security in the Bosphorus Strait and Marble Sea. What's going on? What should we do? What can we do? If one inspection team, for example, is not enough, if they fail to do their job, they should have another team or three more teams. And it's the issue exclusively of organization, and these issues it's just that somebody doesn't want to solve these issues, and I'm sure it's not the representatives of Ukraine or United Nations or Turkish representatives, because the Turkish are very interested in successful realization of this grain deal, and the president of Turkey keeps emphasizing that it's the Turkey's merit, this grain deal, and we as the analyst team, we have to appeal to Mr. Erdogan and to inform him that the project implemented by him, it requires certain correction. Yes, Mr. Andrii, we understand that Turkey undertook the obligations for realization of this grain deal, so maybe it's about time to go to the level not only to the sailors that you mentioned who provide security in the strait, but to the higher political authorities. Now that we can assert that this corridor doesn't operate in full, do you see any solutions how to maybe escalate this issue to the level of the political authorities of the country who acted as a guarantor to the deal? Well, you understand that now Russian Federation dreams about any kind of negotiation. Anything they do, everything they do, shellings, missile strikes, drone strikes, any hindering in operation of the grain corridor, what they're telling us is like, let us meet and talk. They need any kind of negotiation because the things on the front lines are not going well. So they will want to create any possible conditions so that at least somebody starts talking to them. And where there is a problem with the grain, if we talk about the negotiations on the level of ministers, so that they can ask more questions, they can add more issues to their agenda. Dear colleagues, any questions? Anastasia Kravchenko, Ukrinform, good afternoon. Recently, Ukrainian authorities, they step up with the initiative to cancel the inspections. Is it actually possible? And to what extent is it going to improve the situation with the speed of movement of the vessels in the sea? Well, I'm quite convinced that this proposition will not be accepted by Russians. Let's say in this way. There is a vessel in any port, like in Odessa or Chornomorsk port, and it has 20, 30, or maybe even 70 metric tons of grain, which is going to Egypt or China or elsewhere. So what's actually to check there? We're not going to ship any weapons. We're only shipping grain. So from the point of view of Russian Federation, there is nothing to inspect there. from their point of view, it's more important to inspect the vessels coming into Ukrainian ports, so that no weapons or ammunition is about to be transported to Ukraine. So that the inspections are mostly on the ships that leave Ukrainian ports with Ukrainian grain. So it's just their technology of impeding this process, of hindering this process. They want to create mass protests, maybe, in the countries which require Ukrainian grain the most. So you remember, at the very beginning of this grain deal, as it was just signed, the market prices for the grain fell substantially throughout the world. Now the situation is quite opposite. As the vessels are being detained, are being delayed, like when 1.5 million of tons of grain is delayed, which was supposed to be in the countries of Asia and Africa, already it's obvious that the world prices would grow. That's the goal pursued by Russia. What are your forecasts as an expert? How will the situation develop? I'm convinced that this situation depends completely on the president of Turkey. He acted as almost the only single person in the world who can talk to both Russia and Ukraine. It's his political plus, it's his political merit with regard to all the political processes happening in Turkey. So I think that Russian Federation can close this project, so to say, only if they quarrel with President of Turkey, Erdogan. I don't think that Putin's regime has any intentions to quarrel with Turkey, because it will entail very serious consequences for Russian Federation, first of all. That's why I think that what we're seeing now is the invitation to negotiations. And then through Mr. Erdogan, they can submit some package of proposals. So I don't see any probability of the grain corridor to cease its existence, but I want to emphasize again that it depends on whether Putin's regime will want to quarrel with Mr. Erdogan, because they had such attempts earlier. We remember back in 2015, the Turkish anti-aircraft defense, they shut down the Russian plane who entered the airspace. So I think that the process will be still slowly flowing, and the Russians will seek some negotiations, at least with somebody. Mr. Andrii, thank you very much for this comprehensive conversation. Dear colleagues, I will remind you, we had Andrii Klymenko with us, the head of monitoring group of the Institute of Black Sea Studies. Dear colleagues, we're preparing the schedule for tomorrow. Please follow our announcements and stay with us.